The forest had always been a peaceful place where people came to escape the noise of the world. On weekends, families visited for picnics, hikers walked the familiar trails, and nature lovers stood quietly with cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of wildlife. But on that particular morning, the forest did not feel peaceful at all. A cold wind moved through the trees, and even the birds seemed strangely quiet, as if they sensed something was wrong. A small group of hikers walked along a narrow path, talking softly among themselves. They loved exploring new areas, and this trail was one they had never tried before. The air smelled fresh, mixed with damp leaves and pine. Everything looked calm at first. Then one of them stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal the others to be quiet. They had heard something, a deep, heavy sound, almost like breathing, but louder and uneven. They stayed still, listening carefully. The sound came again, followed by the snap of a branch. Something big was moving nearby. At first, none of them knew what it could be. The forest was home to deer, elk, and sometimes wolves, but this sounded much larger. The hikers slowly stepped forward, trying to see through the trees. Sunlight flickered between the branches, making it hard to tell what was ahead. Then they saw her. A huge grizzly bear stepped out from behind a fallen log. Her fur, normally thick and golden brown, looked dirty and matted. She limped as she moved, dragging one side of her body. Her head hung low, and every step looked painful. Even from a distance, they could see a large wound on her shoulder, swollen and dark. The bear tried to walk, but her legs trembled beneath her weight. The hikers froze. Their first instinct was fear. Grizzly bears were known to be powerful and dangerous, especially the big females. But the bear did not look angry or aggressive. She looked exhausted, weak, and completely defeated. One of the hikers whispered that she must be hurt badly. Another quietly pointed out that bears usually avoided people unless something was very wrong. The group slowly backed away, careful not to make sudden movements. They didn't want to scare her, but the bear didn't even seem to notice them. She stumbled forward, collapsed onto her front legs, and let out a low, painful sound that none of them would ever forget. It wasn't a growl. It sounded more like a cry, the kind an injured animal makes when it doesn't know what else to do. For a long moment, they simply watched, their hearts heavy. This wasn't just any bear. Many locals referred to her as the Queen of the Forest. She was known for her size, her strength, and the way she ruled her territory. People had seen her raise cubs over the years, guiding them through the mountains and protecting them fiercely. She was respected even by other animals in the area. But the proud queen now looked like she was barely clinging to life. After a minute, the bear forced herself up again and moved deeper into the trees. The hikers waited until she disappeared before they took a breath. They knew she needed help. They also knew they weren't the ones who could give it. They quickly decided to go back to town and report the sighting to the local wildlife office. None of them wanted to think about what might happen to the bear if no one acted soon. On their way back, the group talked about the wound they had seen. It was deep enough that bone almost showed. Something must have attacked her, maybe another bear or a large animal defending its food. Infection had already set in. Her breathing sounded rough, and her balance was unsteady. If she didn't collapse somewhere in the forest first, the infection alone could take her life. When they reached the small ranger station near the entrance of the forest, they rushed inside and explained what they had seen. The rangers listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. They knew exactly which bear the hikers were describing. The queen grizzly had been spotted many times before, usually strong and healthy. Hearing that she was injured was serious news. The lead ranger invited the hikers to sit while he made a few calls. He tried contacting a wildlife vet who occasionally helped with injured animals. He also informed the regional wildlife office, which dealt with larger emergencies. The hikers listened to the conversations, hoping something could be done quickly. But the calls did not go as smoothly as they expected. Some people the ranger contacted said the situation was too dangerous. A fully grown grizzly, even injured, could be unpredictable. Getting close enough to treat her could risk human lives. Others suggested that the forest should be left alone, that nature would take its course. It wasn't the answer anyone wanted to hear, but it was the one they received again and again. The hikers exchanged worried looks. They felt guilty leaving the bear behind without help. One of them asked the ranger why no one wanted to go out there. The ranger sighed and explained that dealing with a healthy grizzly was hard enough, but approaching an injured one was far worse. Fear could make even a weak bear fight back. Even so, the hikers insisted that something should be done. They had never seen a wild animal look so helpless. The ranger promised he would keep trying, but the hikers could tell he wasn't sure what else could be done. As the day passed, word spread around the small town. People who often walked the forest trails began talking, sharing their own memories of seeing the queen grizzly near the river, digging for roots, or guiding her cubs across the hills. Some people felt sorry for her. Others said it was too risky to interfere. Many simply hoped she would recover on her own, though deep down they knew it was unlikely. That evening, the hikers went back home, but they couldn't stop thinking about the bear. They replayed the scene in their minds, the way she dragged her leg, the way she collapsed, the way her breathing rattled as if her body was giving up. They wondered where she was now. Was she still moving? Was she lying somewhere in the forest, fighting to stay alive? Or had she already fallen? All night, the forest remained quiet. Even the animals seemed to sense something was wrong in the territory. The next morning, the hikers returned to the ranger station, hoping for good news. But the ranger shook his head. No vet had agreed to come. No rescue team had been sent. Everyone who was contacted said the same thing. The risk was too high, and they didn't have the proper equipment or tranquilizers strong enough for such a massive animal. The hikers felt helpless. The ranger looked worried, too. He had spent years working in the forest and had always admired the queen grizzly from a respectful distance. Seeing her suffer like this bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He walked outside and stared at the forest for a long time. He knew the bear was still out there somewhere, struggling. He also knew that if no one found a way to help her, the forest might soon lose its most iconic animal. The queen who had roamed the land for so many years might not survive another day. The hikers approached him again, asking if there was truly nothing left to try. Before he could answer, his phone rang. He listened for a moment. Then his face changed. Whoever was calling had offered a possibility, a thin one, but still a chance. Someone had heard about the situation. Someone who had worked with large animals before. Someone who wasn't afraid to try. The ranger hung up slowly. The hikers waited, holding their breath. He finally turned to them and said that help might be coming after all. It wasn't guaranteed, and it would still be dangerous. But at least one person was willing to step forward when everyone else had refused. Far away in the forest, the queen grizzly lay beneath a cluster of trees, breathing heavily, her body trembling. She didn't know help was on the way. She didn't know that people were worrying about her or discussing her fate. All she knew was pain, exhaustion, and the silent hope that she could survive long enough for something to change. And something was about to change, just not in the way anyone expected. The morning after the hikers reported the injured grizzly, the town was quieter than usual. People went about their day, but most had one thought on their minds: the queen bear. News traveled fast, and everyone who had ever seen her in the forest felt uneasy. She wasn't just a bear. She was the ruler of the forest, the one every animal seemed to respect, the one people remembered from countless hikes and stories. Now she was hurt, and everyone feared the worst. At the local wildlife office, the ranger who had taken the hiker's report sat at his desk, staring at the phone. He had called every available vet, every rescue team, and even tried contacting wildlife experts from nearby regions. Each time, he received the same answer. It's too dangerous. We don't have the proper equipment. An adult grizzly is unpredictable when injured. The excuses were reasonable, but they didn't ease the guilt in his chest. He knew the queen bear needed help, and yet no one was willing to go. A small crowd had gathered outside the office, people curious and worried. A few offered ideas, but most just shook their heads. "We've seen her," one man said. "She's huge. Even healthy, she can crush a person. Injured, forget it." Another woman whispered that if humans tried to capture or treat her, she could die faster from fear and stress. The ranger nodded silently. He understood their fears, but his heart refused to accept doing nothing. Inside the office, the ranger went over reports of past grizzly attacks, not to learn how to harm her, but to understand the risks. Every grizzly encounter he studied reminded him of her strength. The queen was different, though. She had a calm dominance that other bears lacked. She didn't attack without reason. Still, he knew, fear could turn even the calmest animal defensive. Meanwhile, the hikers who had first seen her couldn't stop thinking about the bear. They replayed the memory of her limp, the wound, the sound she made when she tried to stand. Some of them felt guilty that they couldn't do more. They had tried their best to stay calm near her, to avoid scaring her, but that was nothing compared to what she needed now. One of them asked if anyone could go, even if it was risky. But everyone avoided the question. By midday, a few wildlife volunteers arrived at the office. They were younger, enthusiastic, and wanted to help. But when the ranger explained the situation, their faces changed. One volunteer stammered, "A grizzly that size? Injured? Are you serious?" Another added, "Even if we sedated her, moving her safely, I don't think we have the gear." Fear and reality collided in the room. Everyone wanted to help, but the danger was real. Injured, panicked, and massive. The queen could easily kill anyone trying to reach her. The ranger leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. He had years of experience with wildlife, yet he had never faced a situation like this. It wasn't about chasing the bear or controlling her. It was about saving her life while staying safe. And so far, no one had the courage or the right tools to do it. Outside, the forest seemed alive, almost aware. Birds whispered in the trees, leaves rustled, and distant branches snapped under the weight of some unseen animal. The hikers and volunteers felt it too, a sense that the queen bear was out there, struggling, waiting, perhaps silently pleading for someone to act. But the humans remained frozen in their uncertainty. The day stretched on. Calls were made to experts in other states, to veterinarians who specialized in wildlife, to anyone with the experience to help an adult grizzly. Some responded with polite refusals. Others suggested waiting, hoping the bear might survive on her own. The ranger wrote notes, made plans, and tried to stay optimistic, but even he felt the weight of the situation pressing down. This was no ordinary rescue. This was life and death, for both the bear and anyone who dared approach her. As evening approached, the hikers returned home, exhausted but restless. They tried to go about normal routines, but their minds kept drifting back to the queen. How was she moving now? Was she hiding somewhere in the dense trees? Or was she lying helplessly, too weak to hunt or defend herself? They feared she might not make it through the night. The thought haunted them, but there was nothing they could do except hope that someone braver than they would act. Night in the forest brought silence, but it was not comforting. The queen bear lay under a fallen tree, her body aching, her muscles stiff. Every movement was painful, every breath heavy. She was hungry thirsty, and alone. Her instincts told her to survive, but her body was betraying her. Hours passed slowly. Stars appeared in the sky, distant and cold. The forest seemed indifferent to her suffering. Back in town, the ranger sat by his desk with maps spread out. He traced paths through the forest, thinking of where she might be hiding. He considered the risks. Sedating a bear that size required careful planning. One wrong step, and it could be deadly. But doing nothing felt impossible. He knew the queen had survived years in this forest because of her strength, intelligence, and resilience. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this too, but it was not a chance he was willing to leave entirely to fate. Then, late at night, as the town grew quiet, a call came through. The ranger answered quickly, and a voice on the other line spoke with quiet determination. "I can help," the voice said. "I have experience with large animals. I have the tools, the knowledge, and I am willing to go." The ranger listened carefully, asking questions, making sure this person was serious and prepared. After several minutes, he realized that finally, someone had stepped forward when everyone else had refused. The hikers, who were still uneasy, were told the news the next morning. They couldn't believe it. Finally, after hours of worry and helplessness, someone was going to attempt the rescue. The ranger explained that it would be dangerous. Even the most skilled person could be at risk. But for the queen bear, this was the only chance. Without action, she might not survive another day. That night, the hikers couldn't sleep. Their thoughts were a mix of fear and hope. Fear for the human attempting the rescue. Hope for the bear who had been their forest queen for so long. They remembered how strong she was, how clever, and how she had always moved with quiet authority. If anyone could save her, they hoped it would be this brave person. If not, they feared the forest might lose one of its greatest inhabitants. The forest, dark and vast, remained unaware of human worries. The queen bear shifted slightly, trying to get comfortable. Pain shot through her wounded shoulder, but she refused to give up. Hunger gnawed at her, yet she used every ounce of strength to move. Deep inside, she clung to life instinctively, unaware that humans were discussing her fate, preparing for her rescue. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly, and the wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. The night was long, but it was not over. The next morning brought renewed determination. Supplies were prepared, plans were made, and the brave volunteer prepared for the journey. Maps were studied, routes were marked, and strategies considered. Even the ranger, usually calm and methodical, felt a surge of nervous anticipation. This was more than a mission. It was a life-or-death test for a majestic creature that had ruled her forest for years. As the sun rose, the first rays touched the trees, illuminating the trail where the queen bear had been seen. Somewhere in that forest she stirred, unaware that hope had arrived. Her struggle continued, silent and unseen, while humans prepared to intervene. The forest held its breath, waiting for what would come next. One thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same after this. The queen bear's fate hung in the balance, and every step, every decision, every heartbeat mattered. The forest was quiet that morning, but a sense of urgency hung in the air. The injured Grizzly, the queen of the forest, was still out there, moving slowly, struggling with every step. Meanwhile, the human who had volunteered to help prepared for the mission with careful attention. He was not an ordinary person. He had spent years working with large animals, studying their behavior, understanding their instincts. Yet, even with his experience, this was different. He had never attempted to treat a fully grown grizzly alone in the wild. The danger was real, and the risk high. But he could not walk away. He packed his bag with all the equipment he thought he might need. Sedation tools, antibiotics, protective gear, ropes, first aid kits, everything had to be perfect. A small mistake could be fatal, not just for him, but also for the bear. He checked and rechecked each item. He knew that the queen bear was suffering, and if he hesitated or failed, she might not survive another day. This thought pushed him forward. Fear was present, but purpose was stronger. The ranger who had been following the situation closely gave him final instructions. Stay safe. Don't take unnecessary risks. Observe from a distance first. Only move in when you're sure it's safe. The human nodded, understanding every word. He knew the risks, and he respected the danger. He wasn't seeking glory. He was trying to save a life, one that had touched the forest and all who had seen it. He set off into the forest, moving quietly. The trees were tall, dense, and filled with the sounds of nature. Birds called in the distance, leaves rustled under small animals' feet, and the wind carried the smell of wet soil and pine. Every step was deliberate, measured. He had studied the area on maps and knew the likely places the bear would be resting. But even with careful planning, nothing could guarantee that the bear would remain calm or that the plan would work. Hours passed as he tracked the queen through the forest. Broken branches, scuffed earth, and faint paw prints gave him clues to her movements. Her wound had slowed her, but she was still moving. She was strong, resilient, and clever. The human respected her instinctively. This was not just a wild animal. This was the queen of the forest, surviving despite pain and injury. Eventually, he spotted her from a distance. She was lying in a small clearing, her massive body hunched and trembling. The wound on her shoulder was even worse than he had imagined. Infection had spread, and her breathing was shallow and uneven. She lifted her head slightly and sniffed the air, her amber eyes sharp and alert despite the weakness. The human froze for a moment, studying her. He needed to approach carefully, slowly, without alarming her. One wrong move could make her fight or run, and either way, the situation would become more dangerous. He set up a perimeter at a safe distance, observing her movements. He watched how she shifted her weight, how she tried to stand, how she sniffed the air, and listened to sounds around her. The human knew that this was a delicate moment. Trust had to be earned, even if it was only for a short time. He whispered to himself, not as a command, but as a reassurance. Stay calm. Stay calm. She feels fear too. After long moments of observation, he prepared the sedation tools. He adjusted the equipment, making sure everything was ready. The human had done this before with smaller animals, but nothing compared to the size and strength of the queen bear. He took a deep breath, steadying his heartbeat. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every thought reminded him of why he was here. He could not turn back. He moved slowly toward her, staying downwind to avoid alarming her. She lifted her head, sniffing the air, and growled softly, a low, tired sound that was more warning than aggression. The human froze, letting her senses detect him as non-threatening. Then, with a carefully measured throw, he delivered the sedative from a safe distance. It landed just right. The bear flinched, staggered, but didn't panic. Her eyes widened, then slowly began to droop. It was working. The human kept his distance, watching intently as the queen's massive body began to relax. Her breathing slowed, her muscles softened, and she finally sank to the ground. Relief washed over him, but he knew the critical part had just begun. He approached cautiously, every step deliberate, ready to retreat if she awoke suddenly. Once he reached her, he examined the wound. The shoulder was badly infected, filled with debris and dirt from the forest floor. If it was left untreated, it would have become fatal. The human carefully cleaned the area, removing stones, sticks, and dried blood. His hands moved with precision and care, knowing that any sudden movement could cause pain or provoke her. He applied antibiotics, dressing the wound as best as he could under the circumstances. Time seemed to stretch as he worked. Sweat dripped from his brow, his muscles ached from crouching, and the fear never left him completely. But neither did determination. He knew the bear depended on him, even if she didn't understand it. Every action he took was for her survival. Every careful movement mattered. He whispered softly to her, words meant to soothe, not as commands, just gentle reassurance. Hours passed. The forest around them was alive, yet silent in comparison to the intensity of what was happening in that clearing. Birds remained perched, small animals scurried away quietly, and the wind moved gently through the trees. The queen lay still, healing slowly, her body beginning to recover under the human's care. Finally, the human stepped back, exhausted but satisfied. He had done what he could. The bear's breathing was steady, the wound cleaned, and she was safe for the moment. He observed her from a distance as she slept, ensuring she remained calm. Even in sedation, she looked regal, powerful, and alive. He allowed himself a quiet smile, knowing this was a success, yet aware that the hardest part of her recovery was only beginning. The human stayed nearby for the rest of the day, leaving food and water within sight, but not too close to disturb her. He monitored her closely, ready to intervene if she showed signs of distress. The queen stirred occasionally, but she did not panic. She was strong, resilient, and slowly responding to the care she had received. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the forest, the human felt a quiet satisfaction. He had faced one of the greatest challenges of his career and succeeded. But more importantly, he had given the queen bear a chance to survive. He knew the next days would be critical, that monitoring would continue, and that patience would be essential. The forest had its queen, and she had been given a second chance. Back in town, word spread slowly. Those who knew about the rescue waited anxiously for updates. Some were amazed that someone had dared to approach such a massive, dangerous animal. Others were hopeful that the queen would fully recover. For the first time since the hikers had reported her, there was a sense of hope. The forest, quiet and vast, had witnessed a rare moment of human courage meeting wild majesty, life preserved against the odds. The night came, and the human remained near the clearing, keeping watch. He knew that even small mistakes could undo all that had been done. He observed the queen's breathing, her slight movements, and her response to the food and water he left. Every detail mattered. In the darkness, he felt a strange sense of connection, not just with the bear, but with the forest itself. He understood its rhythms, its dangers, and its beauty. And he knew that he had played a part in protecting it, even in a small way. By morning, the queen bear was already showing signs of recovery. Her breathing was stronger, her eyes brighter, as she tried to shift her weight without pain. It was slow, but it was progress. The human watched quietly, allowing her space, ready to provide help if needed. For the first time in days, she looked less like a wounded animal and more like the ruler of the forest. She had always been. The human packed up some of his equipment but stayed nearby. He knew the queen's recovery would take time, patience, and careful observation. She was no ordinary bear. She was strong, intelligent, and resilient. If she could survive the next few days, she would likely regain her full strength. And he would continue to ensure she had the support she needed. The forest seemed calmer now, almost in gratitude. Birds began to sing, leaves rustled gently, and the wind carried the scents of pine and earth. The queen bear, once weak and in danger, was slowly regaining her strength. And somewhere deep in the trees, life continued, watched over by both the wild queen and the human who had dared to save her. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine needles. The forest seemed peaceful from a distance, but for the human who had volunteered to help the queen bear, every sound was amplified. Twigs snapping under small animals, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant calls of birds, all of it reminded him of how careful he had to be. He was heading deeper into the forest than he had ever gone before, following the trail of the wounded queen. Every step brought him closer to her, but also closer to danger. He moved slowly, measuring every step. The terrain was uneven, filled with rocks, roots, and fallen logs. He had to keep his balance while carrying equipment, keeping an eye out for any signs of the bear. Her tracks were easier to follow than he expected, but she was clever. She moved in patterns that avoided humans whenever possible, even while injured. That intelligence was part of what had made her the queen of the forest. After several hours of walking, he spotted her from a distance. She was resting near a small stream, her massive body partially hidden by tall grass. Her breathing was heavier than normal, and she shifted her weight slightly as she lay down. He noticed that she had tried to hunt small animals, but had not succeeded. Her body was weak, and the infection in her shoulder wound had slowed her movements. She looked exhausted, yet there was still a spark of life in her eyes. He paused to observe her. The human knew that any sudden movement could alarm her. She could easily stand and defend herself if she felt threatened. He carefully unpacked the sedation equipment, checking everything twice. He had studied her behavior for days now, learning how she responded to sounds, movement, and the presence of humans. He knew he had only one chance to sedate her safely. From a safe distance, he delivered the tranquilizer with precision. The dart hit its mark, and the bear flinched. For a moment, she looked around, alert and cautious, but she did not panic. Her breathing became slower, and her muscles started to relax. The human waited, making sure she was fully under before approaching. He had done this before with smaller animals, but nothing compared to the size and strength of a fully grown grizzly. When he stepped closer, he moved with deliberate care. Every step was slow, measured, and designed to avoid startling her. He could see the wound clearly now. It was deep and dark, filled with dirt and debris from the forest floor. Infection had spread around the edges, and her shoulder was swollen. If it had been left untreated, she could have died within days. The human knew he had to work quickly, but carefully. He began cleaning the wound, removing stones, sticks, and dried blood. His hands moved with precision, steady and careful, knowing that even the slightest mistake could cause pain or provoke her. He applied antibiotics and carefully dressed the wound. The bear remained still, her massive eyes half closed, trusting him in a way that few animals ever did. It was a delicate balance of trust, skill, and patience. Hours passed as he worked. Sweat ran down his face, his muscles ached, and his hands grew sore from the careful labor. But he did not stop. He knew that every moment counted. The forest seemed to pause around them, the birds silent, the wind soft, as if nature itself was watching. The queen bear's survival depended on this, and he refused to fail. After finishing the wound, he observed her for signs of distress. Her breathing was steady, her body relaxed, and she did not react negatively to the treatment. He left food and water nearby, ensuring she would not need to search for sustenance while she recovered. Even in sedation, she maintained a sense of dignity and strength. It was clear why she had been the queen of her territory for so long. The humans stayed near her for the rest of the day, constantly monitoring her. He had to make sure she remained calm, and that the sedative continued to work until she could safely wake up. He noted the position of the sun, the temperature, and the changes in her breathing. Every detail mattered. If she awoke too soon, she could panic and injure herself further. If he left too soon, she could struggle and worsen her wound out by evening. The forest grew quieter. The wind carried the smell of pine and damp earth, and shadows stretched long across the clearing. The human took a moment to breathe, looking at the bear and the life he had fought so hard to protect. She stirred slightly, adjusting her weight, but did not panic. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, alert yet calm. He whispered softly, words of reassurance, knowing that his voice alone could calm her instincts. Night came, and he set up a small camp nearby. He remained vigilant, keeping watch while the queen rested. He observed her, noting her breathing, her attempts to shift, and her responses to the sounds of the forest. Even under sedation, she was aware of her surroundings, and he knew that patience was the key to her recovery. He had saved her life, but the work was far from over. Throughout the night, the human kept a close watch. He moved quietly to refill water and leave small amounts of food, always from a safe distance. He understood that the queen needed space to recover, but she also needed support to survive. His presence was meant to help, not to control. Every action was guided by care, knowledge, and respect for her strength. By morning, the queen bear was showing signs of recovery. Her breathing was steadier, her body more relaxed, and she even tried to stand for short moments. The human observed quietly, ready to intervene if necessary. He left more food and water, ensuring she had everything she needed without forcing her to move too much. He had learned to read her movements, her instincts, and her signals. She trusted him, even if only partially, and that trust was essential. Over the next few days, he continued monitoring her. Each day brought small victories. She moved more confidently, her eyes were brighter, and she began to eat again. She even tested her strength by walking short distances, careful not to strain her injured shoulder. The human remained close but cautious, giving her space while ensuring her safety. The forest itself seemed to respond to her recovery. Birds returned to the trees, small animals moved more freely, and the quiet tension that had hung in the air for days began to lift. The queen bear, once weak and injured, was regaining her strength. She still had a long way to go, but hope returned not just to her, but to the forest and to the humans who had dared to help. The human knew that the journey was far from over. Recovery would take time, patience, and constant vigilance. He had risked his life to save the queen, but he was determined to see her return to full strength. Every step he took, every decision he made, was guided by care, respect, and the knowledge that this was more than just a rescue. It was a chance to preserve a life that mattered not only to the forest, but to everyone who had witnessed her presence over the years. The queen bear, lying in the clearing, seemed to sense the change in the air. She shifted, testing her legs, sniffing the wind, and slowly standing. Her movements were careful, but determined. She was regaining the strength that had made her the ruler of the forest. The human watched silently, filled with a quiet pride and relief. He had faced danger, risked his own safety, and succeeded in giving her a second chance. The forest, the queen, and the human shared a moment of understanding. Life had been fragile, yet resilient. Strength had been tested, and courage had been proven. The queen bear, once wounded and alone, was now on the path to recovery, watched over by a human who had dared to care when everyone else had refused. By the end of the day, the human packed up some of his equipment, but stayed nearby, always observing. He knew that the next days would be critical. The queen needed food, water, and protection from further harm. But most importantly, she needed the chance to regain her independence. He had given her that chance, and now it was up to her to reclaim her place as the queen of the forest. As night fell again, he watched her settle beneath a cluster of trees. Her breathing was steady, her body relaxed, and her eyes, though tired, reflected a spark of life. The forest, vast and alive, seemed to hold its breath in quiet anticipation. A life had been saved, a bond had been formed, and hope had returned. The days after the queen bear's rescue passed slowly but surely. The forest, once filled with tense uncertainty, began to feel lighter, almost as if it too was relieved that she had survived. The human who had risked so much to help her stayed nearby, observing quietly, making sure that she was safe, and slowly regaining strength. Every day brought small victories, tiny signs that the bear was recovering. Yet every step forward required patience and care. She was still cautious. Even though she had received help, her instincts remained sharp. She moved slowly at first, testing her legs, her massive shoulders still stiff and sore from the wound and infection. The human watched from a safe distance, never forcing her, allowing her to rebuild her confidence naturally. He left fresh water and food within reach, but carefully placed so she could choose when to approach. He understood that independence was part of healing. The first few days were difficult. She struggled to lift herself, and sometimes stumbled over roots or rocks. Her breathing was uneven at times, and she occasionally growled softly in frustration, a sign of her discomfort. The human stayed calm, giving her space, speaking softly when needed. He had learned that even small sounds or movements could alarm a wild animal, and he respected her instincts. Despite her weakness, she showed moments of her old strength. She would occasionally lift her head, sniffing the air, her amber eyes alert and sharp. These were the moments the human cherished the most, signs that her spirit was unbroken. He quietly cheered her on in his thoughts, though he never tried to make her notice. Trust between humans and wild animals could not be forced, it had to grow naturally, and he understood that better than anyone. As days turned into a week, she began to venture farther from her resting place. The human followed at a careful distance, observing her movements and her interactions with the environment. She was regaining her confidence, her strength returning slowly but surely. Her once hesitant steps became more deliberate, and she started to forage near the stream, testing her ability to hunt small prey. She was still cautious, but each successful movement strengthened her body and her confidence. The human noted every detail. He documented her progress, her behavior, and her interactions with the forest. Each day, she looked more like the queen she had always been. Her coat began to regain its natural shine, her eyes brightened, and the limp in her step started to fade. It was clear that the wound was healing, though he knew it would take time for her to regain full strength. Still, each day brought hope. One morning, she surprised him. She had been resting near the stream when he noticed her standing and stretching, her massive frame silhouetted against the rising sun. She lifted her head high, sniffed the air, and let out a low, deep growl that sounded more like a statement of power than a warning. It was the sound of the forest queen reclaiming her territory. The human watched quietly, amazed. Her spirit, though tested, remained unbroken. Throughout this period, he carefully maintained a balance between providing care and allowing her independence. He understood that she needed space to heal fully, to regain her strength without relying entirely on humans. He left food and water in strategic spots, replenished them daily, and monitored her condition from a distance. Sometimes he would see her paw at the water or sniff the food, testing him, testing the world, testing herself. Every small movement was a sign of progress. Her recovery also affected the forest. Birds returned to the trees, small animals scurried without fear, and the wind through the branches carried a sense of calm. It was as if the entire ecosystem responded to the queen regaining her health. The human felt a deep connection to this rhythm, understanding that his actions had ripple effects beyond just saving one animal. Life in the forest depended on balance, and her survival was a vital part of it. During this time, he witnessed something extraordinary. One afternoon, while he observed her from a distance, the queen bear approached the edge of a small clearing. She stopped, sniffed the air, and looked directly toward him. There was no aggression, no fear, only curiosity and awareness. She took a step closer, then another, testing his presence. The human remained still, calm, and quiet. She studied him for a long moment, then slowly turned and wandered back toward her usual resting spot. It was as if she had acknowledged his help without words, a silent recognition of trust. As the days passed, she began to patrol parts of her territory again. Not far, not recklessly, but carefully. Her movements were deliberate, confident, and measured. She checked the boundaries, sniffed the streams, and occasionally sat near vantage points to observe the forest. A human followed at a distance, making sure she remained safe, but he allowed her to explore, to regain her independence. Every successful step she took was a victory, a sign that she was returning to the powerful queen she had always been. There were small challenges along the way. Sometimes she would stumble on uneven ground, her shoulder hurting slightly. Occasionally she would growl or make sharp movements, reminders of her strength and awareness. The human respected these moments, never interfering unless necessary. He understood that part of her healing was also mental. She had to feel strong and capable in her own right, not just physically, but emotionally as the queen of her territory. The human also witnessed her curiosity returning. She began exploring areas she had avoided while injured, sniffing new scents, pawing at leaves, and watching small animals with interest. She was learning to trust the forest again, and that trust was mirrored in her growing confidence around him. He remained careful, always giving her space, always ensuring she felt safe. After 2 weeks, her progress was remarkable. The wound on her shoulder had mostly healed, and the infection was gone. She could stand and walk long distances without difficulty, her movements strong and balanced. The human felt a quiet pride, not in himself, but in her resilience. She had survived against the odds, endured pain, and now, step by step, reclaimed her place as the forest queen. The human's presence became less necessary as her strength returned. He still monitored her, still left food and water in strategic spots, but she no longer relied on him to move, hunt, or find safety. She had regained her independence, and he knew it was time to let her resume life as it had been before. The bond between them was unspoken, mutual respect born out of trust, courage, and care. One morning, as the sun rose through the trees, the human observed a remarkable scene. The queen bear was patrolling her territory, walking with confidence and grace. She paused at a vantage point, looked around, and then sat quietly, surveying her surroundings. The human watched from a distance, feeling a sense of completion. He had given her a second chance, but it was she who had taken it, showing courage, strength, and determination that few humans could ever match. As he packed up his equipment to leave the forest, he felt a mix of relief and awe. The queen bear, once wounded and alone, had regained her place in the wild. The forest seemed to recognize her return, the rhythm of life settling back into balance. Birds called, small animals moved freely, and the wind whispered through the trees. Life was continuing, resilient and strong. The human walked slowly away, glancing back one last time. The queen bear watched him from her clearing, calm and confident. There was no need for words. The understanding between them was silent but clear. He had helped her survive, and she had reclaimed her life. The forest, the bear, and the human shared a quiet harmony, a moment that would remain in his memory forever. Her recovery was not just physical, but also emotional. She had endured pain, uncertainty, and isolation, yet she emerged stronger. The human had provided the tools and care, but it was her resilience, intelligence, and strength that allowed her to reclaim her life. He knew that her story would continue in the forest, that she would patrol, hunt, and lead as she had for years, but with a new depth of experience and wisdom born from survival. The days turned into weeks, and the human eventually returned home, leaving the queen bare to her life. But the bond remained, invisible yet powerful. He would remember the courage it took to face such danger, the patience required to nurture recovery, and the trust that grew between human and wild animal. The forest continued around him, alive and vibrant, carrying the story of a queen who had been wounded but refused to surrender.